The dust kicked up around Victoria Lawson's worn boots as she stood outside the stage coach office in Bonanza, Nevada, her voice cracking with desperation as she pleaded with the ticket agent for the third time that morning. "Please, I can pay you back once I reach San Francisco. I swear it on my life." The agent, a portly man with wire spectacles perched on his bulbous nose, shook his head with the same stern expression he had worn for the past 20 minutes. "Miss, I have heard every story under the sun. No money means no ticket. That is the policy, and I cannot bend it for anyone, no matter how dire their circumstances." Victoria felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past 3 days since her employer had died suddenly, leaving her without work, without a place to stay, and without any means to leave this God-forsaken mining town. The boarding house owner had given her until sunset to clear out, and the men in this town were starting to look at her differently now that they knew she had no protection, no one to vouch for her character or safety. "I am begging you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the dry Nevada heat and her own exhaustion. "I just need to get out of here. Something terrible will happen if I stay another night." The agent's expression softened slightly, but he remained firm. "I am sorry, miss. Truly, I am. But my hands are tied." Victoria turned away from the window, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She had tried the saloons, the general store, the mining office, anywhere that might have worked. But no one wanted to hire a single woman with no references in a town where decent women were scarce and assumptions ran wild. Her situation had become impossible overnight. She stood on the dusty street, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun that beat down mercilessly on Bonanza. The town sprawled out before her in a chaotic collection of wooden buildings, tents, and hastily constructed structures that housed the hopeful and the desperate who had come seeking silver in the Comstock lode. It was 1874, and the mining boom had brought all manner of people to Nevada, but it had also created a harsh environment where only the strong or the lucky survived. "I need to get to San Francisco," she said aloud to no one in particular, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to find my aunt. She will take me in. She has to." A shadow fell across her path, and Victoria looked up to find a tall man standing before her. He wore a dusty brown hat that had seen better days, a faded blue shirt, and well-worn leather chaps over his dark trousers. His boots were scuffed but sturdy, and a gun belt hung low on his hips. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a clear gray that seemed to take in everything with quiet intelligence. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow managed to sound both gentle and commanding. "I could not help but overhear your conversation with the ticket agent. You are trying to get to San Francisco." Victoria felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. How much had this stranger heard of her pitiful begging? "Yes, sir, I am, but that is my concern, not yours." The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with a sun-weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. "Name is Isaac Hartwell. I have been working a claim about 10 miles north of here for the past year. I'm heading west myself, actually. Got business in California." Victoria studied him warily. In her experience, men who approached desperate women rarely had honorable intentions. "That is very interesting, Mr. Hartwell, but I fail to see what that has to do with me." Isaac shifted his weight, seeming almost uncomfortable. "Well, miss, I heard you asking for passage. The stage coach leaves in 2 hours. If you need a ticket, I would be willing to purchase one for you." The offer stunned Victoria into silence. She stared at this stranger, searching his face for any sign of the ulterior motives that surely must be lurking behind such unexpected generosity. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "That is true enough," Isaac admitted, turning his hat over in his hands. "But I know what it is like to be stuck in a place with no way out. Few years back, I found myself in a similar situation in Colorado. A man I had never met gave me enough money to get to the next town. He told me to pay it forward someday. I figure this is that someday." Victoria wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to trust that this was simply a kind gesture from a decent man, but caution held her back. "What would you want in return?" Isaac met her gaze directly. "Nothing. I am buying my own ticket anyway. It makes no difference to me if I buy one or two. You need help and I can provide it. That is all there is to it." "I do not even know you," Victoria repeated, but her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. The alternative to accepting his help was spending another night in Bonanza, and that thought filled her with genuine fear. "No, you do not," Isaac agreed. "But the stagecoach will have other passengers. You will not be alone with me. The driver and guard will be there. It is all proper and above board. I am just offering to buy you a ticket, miss. Nothing more, nothing less." Victoria felt something give way inside her, the rigid control she had been maintaining over her emotions for the past 3 days finally cracking. "My name is Victoria Lawson. I worked as a housekeeper for Mr. Theodore Pemberton until he passed away suddenly 3 days ago. I have been trying to find work or passage out of town ever since, but no one will help me. I have an aunt in San Francisco who will take me in, but I have no money for the ticket." Isaac nodded slowly, as if committing her story to memory. "Miss Lawson, it would be my honor to purchase your ticket to San Francisco. Let me go speak to the agent." Before Victoria could respond, Isaac strode past her and up to the ticket window. She watched in stunned disbelief as he spoke briefly with the agent, counted out coins from a leather pouch, and returned moments later with 2 tickets in his hand. "Here," he said, extending one of the tickets toward her. "The stage leaves in 2 hours. Do you have luggage to collect?" Victoria took the ticket with trembling fingers, staring at it as if it were a precious jewel. "I have a small bag at the boarding house. That is all." "I will walk you there to collect it," Isaac offered. "It is not safe for a lady to walk alone in this town." They walked through the dusty streets of Bonanza in silence, Victoria clutching the ticket and stealing glances at her unexpected benefactor. Isaac walked with an easy confidence, nodding to a few men they passed, but keeping his attention primarily on their surroundings. Victoria noticed how other men seemed to assess him and then look away, as if recognizing something in his bearing that warned against trouble. The boarding house was a squat wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The owner, a bitter woman named Mrs. Hutchins, met them at the door with a suspicious glare. "Come for your things?" Mrs. Hutchins asked, her eyes darting between Victoria and Isaac. "I was about to throw them out. You said you would be gone by sunset." "I am leaving now," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the anger she felt at the woman's callousness. "I will just collect my bag." Mrs. Hutchins stepped aside, and Victoria hurried up the narrow stairs to the tiny room she had occupied for the past 3 months. Her possessions fit into a single worn carpetbag: 2 dresses, a nightgown, some undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small leather-bound book of poetry that had belonged to her mother. She took one last look at the bare room, then descended the stairs with her bag. Isaac was waiting on the porch, having apparently exchanged words with Mrs. Hutchins that had driven the woman back inside. He took Victoria's bag without asking, carrying it easily as they walked back toward the main street. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "For the ticket, for walking with me." For everything. Isaac glanced at her, and she saw something like understanding in his gray eyes. You do not need to thank me, Miss Lawson. I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time to help. They had an hour to wait before the stagecoach departed, so Isaac suggested they get something to eat at the hotel restaurant. Victoria hesitated, acutely aware that she had no money to pay for a meal, but Isaac seemed to anticipate her concern. My treat, he said simply. You look like you have not eaten properly in days. He was right. Victoria had been rationing the last of her money for the past 3 days, eating only enough to keep from fainting. The thought of a real meal made her stomach clench with hunger. The hotel restaurant was a modest establishment, but it was clean and relatively quiet. Isaac ordered roast chicken, potatoes, and vegetables for both of them, along with coffee and fresh bread. When the food arrived, Victoria had to restrain herself from eating too quickly, remembering her manners even as her body screamed for sustenance. How long have you been in Nevada? Isaac asked, cutting into his chicken with practiced ease. Victoria swallowed a bite of potato before answering. 6 months. I came out from Missouri with the Pemberton family. Mr. Pemberton had invested in a mining claim and he brought his household staff west with him. But the claim never produced much, and his health began to fail. When he died, his lawyer informed me that there were no funds to pay my wages or provide me with a return ticket home. What about the rest of the household staff? There was only me and an older couple who served as cook and general handyman. They had family in Virginia City who took them in. I had no one. Victoria paused, then added, I have not heard from my aunt in San Francisco in over a year, but she is the only family I have left. I am hoping she will remember me and provide some assistance until I can find proper employment. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. San Francisco is a big city. Lots of opportunities for someone willing to work hard. I am sure you will find something. What about you? Victoria asked, realizing that he had been asking all the questions. Why are you going to California? Isaac took a sip of his coffee before answering. I worked a mining claim here for a year, hoping to strike it rich like everyone else. I found enough silver to make it worthwhile, but not enough to make me wealthy. I have been saving my earnings, and now I have enough to buy some land in California. I want to start a ranch, raise cattle and horses. Mining is hard work with uncertain rewards. I want something more stable. That sounds like a good plan, Victoria said, and she meant it. There was something solid and reassuring about Isaac Hartwell, something that made her feel safe for the first time in days. They finished their meal and walked to where the stagecoach was preparing to depart. The vehicle was a Concorde coach, painted red and yellow, with leather thoroughbraces that would provide some cushioning on the rough roads ahead. The driver, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard, was checking the harnesses on the 6-horse team, while a younger man with a shotgun stood guard nearby. 3 other passengers were already waiting. A well-dressed businessman who introduced himself as Mr. Horace Drummond, a middle-aged woman traveling with her teenage son, and an older gentleman who appeared to be a preacher based on his black suit and white collar. Isaac helped Victoria into the coach, handing up her bag before climbing in himself. The interior of the stagecoach was cramped, with 3 bench seats that faced each other. Victoria found herself seated between Isaac and the window, with Mr. Drummond across from her. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Alina Finch, sat beside Drummond with her son, a gangly youth of about 16 named Robert. The preacher, Reverend Samuel Morse, took the remaining seat beside Isaac. The driver called out, the whip cracked, and the stagecoach lurched into motion, leaving Bonanza behind in a cloud of dust. Victoria pressed her face to the window, watching the ramshackle mining town recede into the distance, and felt a wave of relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She was finally leaving. She was finally safe. The first few hours of the journey passed in relative silence, broken only by occasional attempts at conversation from Mr. Drummond, who seemed determined to impress everyone with his business acumen, and Reverend Morse, who offered gentle commentary on the landscape they were passing through. The road was rough, following the path of least resistance through the Nevada desert, and the coach swayed and bounced constantly, making conversation difficult. Isaac sat quietly beside Victoria, his long legs cramped in the confined space, his hat pulled low over his eyes as if he were dozing. But Victoria noticed that he seemed alert to every sound, every change in the coach's rhythm. He had the watchful quality of someone accustomed to danger, someone who had learned not to let his guard down completely. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, the driver called out that they would be stopping at a way station for the night. Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety. She had not thought beyond getting on the stagecoach. She had no money for a room or a meal. As if sensing her concern, Isaac leaned close and said quietly, "The fare includes a room and meals at the way stations. You do not need to worry about payment." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "You have already done so much. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "I told you, I am not looking for repayment," Isaac said, his voice firm but kind. "Just accept the help and stop worrying." The way station was a low adobe building surrounded by a split-rail fence and several outbuildings. The station keeper, a weathered man named Johnson, greeted them with professional courtesy and showed them to a dining room where a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and coffee was served. After dinner, Mrs. Finch and Victoria were shown to a small room with 2 narrow beds, while the men would share a larger bunkroom. As Victoria prepared for bed, Mrs. Finch peppered her with questions about her circumstances and her relationship with Isaac. "He is not my husband or even an acquaintance," Victoria explained, trying to maintain her privacy while being polite. "He very generously purchased my ticket when he saw that I was in need. He is simply a kind stranger." Mrs. Finch looked skeptical. "A man does not buy a ticket for a woman he does not know without expecting something in return." "Mr. Hartwell has been nothing but a gentleman," Victoria said firmly. "He has made no improper suggestions or demands. He simply helped someone in need." Mrs. Finch sniffed but said nothing more, turning over to sleep. Victoria lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the desert night through the open window, thinking about Isaac Hartwell and the strange turn her life had taken. She had been so desperate that morning, so certain that something terrible would happen to her. And then he had appeared, like something out of a story, offering help without conditions or expectations. She had learned to be wary of men, especially in mining towns where women were scarce and men often behaved as if normal rules of decency did not apply. But Isaac seemed different. There was a quiet strength about him, a sense of honor that she found deeply appealing. She told herself not to read too much into his kindness, that he was simply a decent man doing a good deed, but she could not help the small flutter of hope that stirred in her chest. The next morning, they were back on the road by sunrise. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled west, the harsh desert giving way to rolling hills and eventually to forests of pine and cedar. The road climbed steadily upward, following old wagon trails and stage routes that connected Nevada to California. On the second day, as they were crossing through a particularly remote stretch of road, the stagecoach suddenly lurched to a halt. The driver shouted something urgent, and the guard fired his shotgun into the air. Isaac immediately pushed Victoria down below the window line, his body shielding hers as he drew his revolver. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice sharp with authority. Through the window, Victoria could see 3 men on horseback blocking the road. They were rough-looking characters with bandanas covering the lower halves of their faces. Road agents, she realized with a spike of terror. "Bandits!" The leader of the group called out. "Everyone out of the coach. Nice and slow, do not make this harder than it needs to be." The passengers emerged one by one, hands raised. Isaac kept Victoria behind him as they climbed down, his body language protective. The bandits ordered everyone to form a line, and the leader began moving down the row, collecting valuables. Mrs. Finch was crying softly, clutching her son. Mr. Drummond sputtered with outrage but complied when one of the bandits pressed a gun to his chest. When the leader reached Victoria, his eyes narrowed. Well, what do we have here?" He reached out to touch her face, and Victoria flinched back. Isaac stepped forward, placing himself between Victoria and the bandit. "Leave her alone. Take what you want and go." The bandit leader looked Isaac up and down, taking in his gun belt and steady stance. "You looking to be a hero, cowboy?" "I am looking to avoid bloodshed," Isaac replied evenly. "You have already gotten valuables from the others. There is no need for anyone to get hurt." The tension stretched out for several long seconds, the only sound the nervous stamping of horses, and Mrs. Finch's continued crying. Then the bandit leader laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I like your nerve. Fine, we will take what we have and go, but you," he pointed at Isaac, "hand over that gun belt, nice and slow." Isaac hesitated, his jaw tightening. Victoria could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the odds. Then he slowly unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. "Smart man," the bandit leader said, slinging the belt over his shoulder. He looked at Victoria one more time, then nodded to his companions. "Let us go." The 3 bandits rode off, taking with them money, jewelry, and several pieces of luggage. The driver and guard had been disarmed as well, their weapons taken. As soon as the bandits were out of sight, Mr. Drummond began loudly complaining about the loss of his gold pocket watch, while Reverend Morse tried to calm Mrs. Finch. Victoria turned to Isaac, who was staring after the bandits with a grim expression. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting me." Isaac looked down at her, and his expression softened slightly. "Are you all right? They did not hurt you." "I am fine, thanks to you." Victoria hesitated, then added, "I am sorry you lost your gun because of me." "A gun can be replaced," Isaac said simply. "Your safety cannot." The driver called everyone back to the coach, muttering curses about bandits and the lack of law enforcement in these parts. They continued on their journey, but the atmosphere in the coach had changed. Everyone was shaken, jumping at every sound, peering nervously out the windows. Isaac remained quiet, but Victoria noticed that he sat even closer to her now, his shoulder touching hers in the cramped space. There was something comforting about his presence, a solid reassurance that she was not alone or unprotected. That evening, when they stopped at another way station, the station keeper provided Isaac with an old revolver after hearing about the robbery. "It is not much," the man said, "but it is better than nothing. These roads are not safe without protection." Over dinner, the passengers discussed the robbery, with Mr. Drummond insisting that he would have fought the bandits if he had been armed, and Reverend Morse suggesting that perhaps it was God's will that no one had been hurt. Victoria found herself gravitating toward Isaac, sitting beside him at the long table, feeling safer in his proximity. After the meal, Isaac and Victoria found themselves alone on the porch of the way station, looking out at the darkening sky. The stars were beginning to emerge, brilliant points of light in the vast expanse of night. "Are you truly all right?" Isaac asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "That must have been frightening." "It was," Victoria admitted. "But you kept me safe. You seem to keep doing that." Isaac turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the windows, she could see the concern in his eyes. "I am glad I was there. I do not like to think what might have happened if you had been traveling alone." "I would not have been traveling at all if not for you," Victoria pointed out. "I would still be stuck in Bonanza, facing a very different kind of danger." They stood in silence for a moment, and Victoria became acutely aware of how close they were standing, how her heart seemed to beat faster whenever Isaac was near. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to being protected and cared for, but deep down she knew it was something more. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said hesitantly. "Of course. Why did you really buy my ticket?" "I do not believe it was just about paying forward a kindness. There has to be more to it than that." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria wondered if she had overstepped, if she had somehow offended him. Then he said, "My sister was in a situation similar to yours once. She was working in Denver and her employer died suddenly. She had no money, no way to get home. She ended up in a bad situation, working in a saloon because she had no other choice. By the time I found her and brought her home, she was a different person. Broken. She died 2 years later, and I have always believed it was because of what happened to her in Denver." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "I am so sorry. When I saw you begging for a ticket, desperate to get away from that town, I saw my sister. I saw a chance to do for you what I wish someone had done for her. I could not help her, but I could help you." Isaac's voice was rough with emotion. "So that is why. It was not just about paying forward a kindness. It was about making sure another woman did not end up like my sister." Without thinking, Victoria reached out and took his hand. "Your sister would be proud of you. What you did for me, it matters. It matters more than you know." Isaac squeezed her hand gently, and they stood like that for several minutes, hands clasped, looking out at the stars. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a recognition that what she felt for this man went beyond gratitude or relief. She was falling for him, for his quiet strength and his gentle kindness, for the way he protected without demanding anything in return. The journey continued over the following days, and with each passing mile, Victoria and Isaac grew closer. They talked during the long hours in the stagecoach, sharing stories of their lives and their hopes for the future. Isaac told her about his plans for his ranch, describing the kind of life he wanted to build. Victoria shared her love of books and poetry, reciting lines from memory that made him smile. The other passengers noticed the growing connection between them. Mrs. Finch no longer seemed suspicious of Isaac's motives, and even Mr. Drummond stopped trying to monopolize the conversation, seeming to recognize that something special was developing between the cowboy and the young woman. On the 4th day of travel, they crossed into California. The landscape changed dramatically, the dry hills giving way to forests of enormous trees and eventually to the distant glimpse of the Pacific Ocean. The air felt different here, cooler and moister, carrying the scent of salt and pine. As they drew closer to San Francisco, Victoria felt a growing anxiety. What would she find when she arrived? Would her aunt even remember her? Would she be welcomed or turned away? And what would happen with Isaac? They had not spoken about what would happen when they reached their destination, when their journey together ended. On their last night before reaching San Francisco, they stopped at a way station in the foothills. After dinner, Isaac asked Victoria to walk with him, and they strolled away from the buildings toward a grove of oak trees. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the golden hills. We will reach San Francisco tomorrow, Isaac said, stating the obvious. Yes, Victoria replied, her heart heavy. I suppose this is where our paths will diverge. Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, his gray eyes seemed to glow. Do they have to? Victoria's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean that these past few days with you have been the best I have had in a very long time. I know we barely know each other, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you after only a few days, but I cannot let you go without telling you how I feel. How do you feel? Victoria whispered, afraid to hope. I have fallen for you, Victoria, completely and utterly. When I bought your ticket in Bonanza, I thought I was just helping someone in need. But then I got to know you, and I realized you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are brave and kind and intelligent. You quote poetry and make me laugh. You make me want to be a better man. Isaac took a deep breath. I know you have to find your aunt, and I understand if you need time to get settled, but I would like to court you properly if you will allow it. I would like to see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, could become something lasting. Tears streamed down Victoria's face, but they were tears of joy. I have been so afraid to admit how I feel. I thought it was too soon, that I was just confused because you saved me. But it is not confusion. I have fallen for you too, Isaac. These days with you have shown me what it means to be truly cared for, to be valued for who I am. I would very much like for you to court me. Isaac's face broke into a wide smile, and he reached out to cup her face gently in his hands. May I kiss you? Yes, Victoria breathed. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling, their faces flushed with happiness. We will go to San Francisco together, Isaac said. You will find your aunt and I will find lodging. We will take things slowly, do this right. And when the time is right, I will ask you to marry me and come with me to start our ranch. Does that sound acceptable? It sounds perfect, Victoria said and kissed him again. They arrived in San Francisco the next afternoon. The city sprawled across hills that overlooked a magnificent bay. Buildings crowded together in a chaotic jumble of wood and brick and stone. The streets were busy with people, horses, wagons, and even the occasional cable car, a new innovation that fascinated Victoria. Isaac insisted on accompanying Victoria to find her aunt. They asked for directions and eventually found themselves in front of a modest but respectable house in a residential neighborhood. Victoria's hands trembled as she knocked on the door. An older woman answered, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and intelligent. She stared at Victoria for a long moment, and then her face transformed with recognition. Victoria, little Victoria Lawson, is that really you? Yes, Aunt Margaret, it is me. Margaret pulled Victoria into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her face. Oh, my dear girl, I thought I might never see you again. Come in, come in. Victoria introduced Isaac, explaining briefly how they had met and what had brought her to San Francisco. Margaret's eyes moved between them, seeing more than Victoria said, and a knowing smile crossed her face. Well, Mr. Hartwell, it seems I owe you a great debt for bringing my niece safely to me. You must stay for dinner. I insist. Over the course of the evening, Victoria learned that her aunt had written many letters to her in Missouri. But they had never reached Victoria, who had already left for Nevada. Margaret was a widow who ran a small dressmaking business from her home, and she immediately offered Victoria a place to stay and work in the shop. You always had a good hand with a needle, Margaret said. I would be glad of the help, and it would give you a chance to get back on your feet. Isaac visited every day for the next 2 weeks, courting Victoria with a propriety that would have satisfied even the strictest chaperone. He brought her flowers, took her on walks through the city, and sat in Margaret's parlor making polite conversation while Victoria worked on dress orders. But in stolen moments, when Margaret was occupied elsewhere, they shared kisses and whispered promises about their future together. Isaac found work at a livery stable while he searched for the right piece of land to purchase. His mining proceeds gave him a good foundation, but he wanted to make sure he chose wisely. He often talked with Victoria about his vision for the ranch, asking her opinions, including her in his plans in a way that made her feel valued and important. One evening, about a month after their arrival in San Francisco, Isaac asked Victoria to go for a walk along the waterfront. They strolled hand in hand, watching the ships in the harbor and the gulls wheeling overhead. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. "I found it," Isaac said suddenly. "The perfect spot for the ranch. It is about 60 miles south of here, near a town called Paso Robles. Good grazing land, water access, and room to grow. I met with the owner today, and he has agreed to sell." "That is wonderful," Victoria said, genuinely happy for him. But she felt a pang of sadness too, knowing that 60 miles was a considerable distance. Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her. "I have been courting you for a month now. I know that is not very long by society's standards, but I knew how I felt about you after only a few days. This past month has only confirmed what I already knew. I love you, Victoria. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build that ranch with you by my side. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are there, and go to sleep every night holding you in my arms." He dropped to one knee right there on the waterfront, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Victoria Lawson, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with a dream and a heart full of love for you?" Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she looked down at this incredible man, who had appeared in her life at her darkest moment and brought light and hope and love. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Isaac Hartwell. I love you with all my heart." Isaac stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, not caring who might see. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at a church near Margaret's house. Margaret cried through the entire service, happy tears for her niece who had found such unexpected happiness. Mrs. Finch and her son Robert attended, having struck up a friendship with Victoria during their stage-coach journey, and remained in San Francisco. Even Reverend Morse, who had continued on to a church assignment in the city, performed the ceremony. Victoria wore a dress she and Margaret had made together, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac wore a new suit, and he looked so handsome that Victoria felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the altar. As they exchanged vows, Victoria thought back to that desperate morning in Bonanza when she had stood outside the stagecoach office, begging for a way out. She had been so lost, so afraid, with no idea how her life would change because of one kind stranger. Isaac had bought her a ticket and rode beside her, but he had given her so much more than transportation. He had given her hope, love, and a future. After the wedding, they spent 2 days in a hotel in San Francisco, a brief honeymoon before beginning their new life together. Those 2 days were a revelation to Victoria, a time of intimacy and discovery as they learned each other's bodies and hearts. Isaac was tender and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. She had been nervous about this aspect of marriage, having heard whispered stories from other women about painful or unpleasant experiences. But with Isaac, it felt natural and beautiful, an expression of the love they shared. On the 3rd day, they packed their belongings and prepared to travel south to their new home. Margaret tearfully embraced them both, making Victoria promise to write often and visit when she could. "You have found a good man," Margaret whispered to Victoria. "Hold on to him and build a beautiful life together." They traveled by train and then by wagon to Paso Robles, arriving at their new property on a warm afternoon in late summer. The land stretched out before them, rolling hills covered in golden grass with clusters of oak trees providing shade. A small creek ran through the property, ensuring water for livestock. The previous owner had left behind a modest house, a barn, and several outbuildings. It was rough and would need work, but Victoria could see the potential, could imagine the life they would build here. Over the next months, they worked from dawn to dusk establishing their ranch. Isaac purchased cattle and horses, building up a herd while Victoria transformed the house into a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a garden, and even acquired some chickens for fresh eggs. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men looking for steady work, and slowly the ranch began to take shape. It was hard work, harder than anything Victoria had done before, but she loved it. She loved the feeling of building something with Isaac, of working side by side toward a common goal. She loved the way he looked at her each morning, as if he still could not quite believe she was his wife. She loved the quiet evenings when they would sit on their porch, watching the sun set over their land, talking about their dreams and plans. 6 months after they settled on the ranch, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably carried for miles. He picked her up and spun her around, just as he had when she accepted his proposal, both of them laughing with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Victoria asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Isaac said, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Victoria. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Victoria found the physical demands of ranch life more challenging as she grew larger. Isaac became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and take on only light tasks. Victoria found his concern endearing, even when it bordered on excessive. Margaret came to stay with them 2 weeks before the baby was due, traveling from San Francisco to help with the birth and the first weeks of the infant's life. Her presence reassured both Victoria and Isaac, providing experienced guidance and support. On a cool night in early spring of 1875, almost exactly 1 year after Victoria had stood begging for a ticket in Bonanza, she went into labor. Isaac paced the main room of the house while Margaret attended to Victoria in the bedroom, occasionally calling out reassurances that everything was progressing normally. After several hours of labor, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Margaret finally allowed Isaac into the room, he approached the bed with a mixture of awe and terror on his face. Victoria, exhausted but radiant, held their son in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Isaac sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at the tiny red-faced infant with wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, unable to agree on anything. But now, looking at their son, Isaac said, "What about William?" "William Isaac Hartwell." "William," Victoria repeated, testing the name. "Yes, I like that. Hello, William. Welcome to the world." The first months with William were challenging, filled with sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn. but they were also filled with incredible joy. Isaac proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with William when he cried, changing nappies without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of pure love that made Victoria fall even more deeply in love with her husband. Margaret stayed for 6 weeks before returning to San Francisco, satisfied that Victoria had settled into motherhood. Before she left, she pulled Victoria aside. "You have built a beautiful life here," Margaret said. "I am so proud of you, and I know your mother would be proud too. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something wonderful." "I had help," Victoria said, glancing over to where Isaac was holding William, talking to the infant about horses and cattle as if he could understand. "I had Isaac." "You found each other when you both needed it most," Margaret agreed. "That is the kind of love that lasts a lifetime. Hold on to it." As William grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered. Isaac's hard work and careful management paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and hire more help. Victoria managed the household and began taking in sewing work from women in town, enjoying the creative outlet and the extra income. When William was 2 years old, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Sarah Margaret Hartwell after Victoria's aunt. Sarah had Victoria's dark hair and Isaac's gray eyes, and she was a calm, peaceful baby who seemed content to observe the world around her. William adored his little sister, though his enthusiastic affection sometimes required parental intervention. Victoria often found him trying to share his toys with Sarah, or telling her elaborate stories about the ranch animals. It filled her heart to see her children growing up with love and security, knowing they would never experience the kind of fear and desperation she had felt in Bonanza. As the years passed, Victoria and Isaac built a life that exceeded even their most optimistic dreams. The ranch became one of the most successful in the area, known for quality cattle and well-trained horses. They added on to the house, creating more space for their growing family. Victoria gave birth to 2 more children, a son named Thomas when Sarah was 3, and another daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years after that. Their home became a center of hospitality in the area, with Victoria often hosting dinners and gatherings for their neighbors and friends. She maintained her love of books and poetry, reading to her children every night and instilling in them a love of learning. Isaac taught the children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, taking them out on the ranch and sharing his knowledge of land management and animal husbandry. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Victoria by taking her back to San Francisco for a week, leaving the children with Margaret, who had come to visit for the occasion. They retraced some of their first walks together, visited the church where they had married, and stayed in the same hotel where they had spent their honeymoon. On their last night in the city, they walked along the waterfront to the spot where Isaac had proposed. The bay stretched out before them, dotted with ships, just as it had been that evening 10 years earlier. "You ever think about that day in Bonanza?" Isaac asked, his arm around Victoria's waist. "When I saw you at the stagecoach office, I think about it often," Victoria admitted. "I think about how different my life might have been if you had not been there that day, or if you had walked past without helping." "I think about it too," Isaac said. "I think about how close I came to not going into town that day. I almost stayed at my claim, almost missed the stage." "If I had, we never would have met." Victoria shivered at the thought. "But you did not miss it. You were there exactly when I needed you. Some people might call it fate or divine providence." "I call it the luckiest day of my life," Isaac said, turning to face her. "You were begging for passage out of town, and I bought you a ticket and rode beside you. But Victoria, I have been riding beside you ever since, and I plan to keep riding beside you for the rest of my life. You are my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. These 10 years with you have been the best years I could have imagined." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. Even after 10 years of marriage, 4 children, and countless shared experiences, Isaac could still make her feel like that desperate young woman whose life had changed because of one kind stranger. Except he was not a stranger anymore. He was her husband, her love, her everything. "I love you," she said simply. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you always." They kissed there on the waterfront, just as they had so many times before, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a beautiful life together. When they returned to the ranch, their children ran out to greet them. William, now 12, trying to act mature, while Sarah, 9, threw herself into Victoria's arms. Thomas and Elizabeth, 7 and 5 respectively, chattered excitedly about everything that had happened while their parents were away. That night, after the children were in bed, Isaac and Victoria sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the gentle rush of the creek. "We have built something good here," Victoria said softly. "Something lasting." "We have," Isaac agreed. "And it all started with a stage coach ticket and a journey west." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling completely content. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been in Bonanza, desperate and alone, begging for help. She thought about the long journey across Nevada and into California, learning to trust the quiet cowboy who had helped her. She thought about their courtship, their marriage, the birth of their children, and all the years of hard work and love that had brought them to this moment. Their story had started with an act of kindness, a stranger helping someone in need. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story, a family story, a story of building a life together from nothing but hope and determination. As Victoria sat on the porch with Isaac, surrounded by the land they had cultivated and the family they had created, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been saved by a stage coach ticket, but she had been transformed by love. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. William grew into a strong young man who shared his father's love of horses and land management. By the time he was 18, he was practically running the ranch alongside Isaac, showing a natural talent for breeding and training horses that made Isaac proud. Sarah developed her mother's love of reading and sewing, but she also proved to be an excellent rider with a head for business, often helping Victoria with the accounts and managing the household budget. Thomas, always the adventurer, talked of becoming a lawman or a scout, his young imagination fired by stories of frontier justice and exploration. Elizabeth, the youngest, was gentle and kind, showing an early interest in healing and medicine, often tending to injured animals with remarkable skill and compassion. Victoria watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and melancholy, knowing that eventually they would leave to build their own lives. But for now, they were all together, a family united by love and shared purpose. When Victoria was 42 and Isaac 45, they received news that Margaret had fallen ill. Victoria immediately traveled to San Francisco, staying with her aunt for 2 months as Margaret's health declined. It was a difficult time, but Margaret faced her death with grace and dignity. "You gave me such joy," Margaret told Victoria near the end. "When you arrived on my doorstep with that cowboy beside you, I knew everything would be all right. I saw the way he looked at you, the way you looked at him. I saw the future you would build together." "You made it possible," Victoria said, holding her aunt's frail hand. You welcomed me into your home, gave me a place to stay and work. You gave me the time to fall in love properly. All I did was provide a roof and some meals, Margaret said with a weak smile. You and Isaac did the rest. You built a beautiful life, raised wonderful children. You should be very proud. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep a few days later. Victoria inherited her aunt's house and dressmaking business. After much discussion with Isaac, they decided to keep the house and hire someone to run the shop, using the proceeds to help fund their children's futures. Life continued at the ranch with its joys and challenges. There were years of drought when they struggled to keep the cattle healthy, years of good rain when the grass grew thick and the herd prospered. There were injuries and illnesses, celebrations and sorrows. Through it all, Victoria and Isaac faced everything together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. When William turned 21, he married a local girl named Catherine, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was held at the Hartwell ranch, with half the county in attendance. Victoria cried as she watched her son exchange vows, remembering her own wedding day and thinking about the passage of time. William and Catherine built a house on the far side of the ranch property, and within a year, they welcomed Isaac and Victoria's first grandchild, a boy they named Isaac after his grandfather. Holding that baby in her arms, Victoria felt the circle of life continuing, a new generation beginning its journey. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing at age 19 that she wanted to attend a women's college in San Francisco. It was an unusual choice for a ranch girl, but Victoria and Isaac supported her decision. Sarah studied literature and mathematics, eventually returning to Paso Robles to teach at the local school. She married at 25 to a doctor who set up practice in town, and they had 3 children. Thomas did indeed become a lawman, serving as a deputy sheriff in a nearby county. He married a spirited woman named Maria who shared his sense of adventure, and they had 4 children. Elizabeth pursued her interest in medicine, apprenticing with Sarah's husband and eventually becoming a respected midwife in the area. She married a rancher and had 2 children. As grandchildren accumulated, the Hartwell Ranch became a gathering place for the growing family. Sunday dinners often included 20 or more people. Multiple generations crowded around an extended table, sharing food and stories and laughter. Isaac, his dark hair now streaked with gray, would sit at the head of the table with Victoria beside him, both of them surveying their large family with satisfaction and love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a large celebration, inviting friends and family from all over California. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing. At one point, William stood up to speak, his own son on his hip. 30 years ago, my parents began their life together, William said. They started with nothing but love and determination. They built this ranch from the ground up, created a home filled with love and laughter, and raised 4 children who are better people because of their example. They taught us about hard work, integrity, and the importance of family. They showed us what real love looks like, the kind that lasts and grows stronger over time. Mom, Dad, thank you for everything you have given us. Happy anniversary. Victoria was crying by the end of the speech, and she looked over to see tears in Isaac's eyes as well. He took her hand, squeezing it gently, and she squeezed back, 30 years of shared life compressed into that simple gesture. Later that night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet, Victoria and Isaac walked out to their porch, just as they had done thousands of times before. The California night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. 30 years, Victoria said softly. It seems both longer and shorter than that. I know what you mean, Isaac replied. Sometimes I still feel like that nervous cowboy buying a stagecoach ticket for a desperate young woman. Other times, I cannot remember life before you. Victoria leaned against him, comfortable and content. Do you ever regret it? Giving up the freedom of being alone, taking on a wife and family? Isaac looked at her with surprise. Regret it? Victoria, marrying you and building this life together has been the greatest privilege of my existence. Every day with you has been a gift. Every challenge we faced together. Every joy was doubled because I shared it with you. I have never regretted a single moment. I feel the same way, Victoria said. That day in Bonanza when you appeared and offered to buy my ticket, it felt like a miracle. I was so desperate, so afraid. And then you were there, this kind stranger who asked for nothing in return. You saved me, Isaac. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too, Isaac said quietly. I did not realize how lonely I was until I met you. I thought I was content with my solitary life, working my claim, planning my ranch. But after I met you, after I got to know you, I realized I had been just existing, not really living. You brought color and joy and meaning to my life. You made me want to be better, do better. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two people who had shared 3 decades of life, who had built something lasting and beautiful from a chance encounter. Their journey had started with a desperate plea and an act of kindness, but it had become an epic love story, one that would be passed down through generations of their family. As the years continued to advance, Victoria and Isaac gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operation of the ranch, turning over more responsibility to William and his growing family. They spent their time with grandchildren, tending Victoria's garden and enjoying the peaceful rhythms of their life together. When Victoria was 55 and Isaac 58, they decided to take another trip to San Francisco. It had been years since they had visited the city together, and they wanted to see how it had changed and grown. They stayed in Margaret's old house, which Victoria still owned, and spent their days exploring the city, visiting old haunts and discovering new places. On their last evening in the city, they once again walked to the waterfront, to the spot where Isaac had proposed so many years ago. The bay was busy with ships, more than Victoria remembered from previous visits, and the city had expanded dramatically, sprawling across the hills and valleys. So much has changed, Victoria observed. The city, the world, everything moves so fast now. But some things do not change, Isaac said. I still love you just as much as I did the day I proposed to you here. More, actually. Every year with you has only deepened what I feel. Victoria turned to face him, seeing the lines time had etched on his face, the gray in his hair, the slight stiffness in his movements that spoke of age and hard work. But she also saw the same gray eyes that had looked at her with such kindness in Bonanza, the same gentle strength that had made her feel safe, the same love that had sustained her through 3 decades of marriage. I love you too, she said. You are still the man who bought me a stagecoach ticket, who protected me from bandits, who courted me properly, and made me feel valued. You are still the man who holds my hand during difficult times and laughs with me during good times. You are my best friend, my love, my life. They kissed there on the waterfront, just as they had done as young lovers, as newlyweds, as parents celebrating their 10th anniversary. The kiss was familiar and comfortable, but still filled with the spark that had drawn them together all those years ago. When they returned to the ranch, they found that Catherine, William's wife, had gone into labor with their 4th child. Victoria immediately went to help, drawing on years of experience as a mother and grandmother. Several hours later, a baby girl was born, healthy and beautiful. "What will you name her?" Victoria asked, holding her new granddaughter with practiced ease. William and Catherine exchanged glances. Then Catherine said, "We would like to name her Victoria after you, if that is all right." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would be honored." Life continued its steady progression. Grandchildren grew and married, bringing new faces into the expanding Hartwell family. Great-grandchildren began to arrive, filling the ranch with a new generation of laughter and chaos. Isaac and Victoria, now in their 60s, reveled in their role as family patriarchs, dispensing wisdom and love in equal measure. They still walked together every evening when weather permitted, still talked about their dreams and memories, still held hands like young lovers. Their love had weathered decades, survived challenges and hardships, celebrated joys and triumphs. It had become something solid and enduring, a foundation upon which an entire family had been built. On a warm evening in the spring of 1905, Isaac and Victoria celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They were 70 and 67 years old, respectively, still healthy and active, but feeling the accumulated weight of years. Their family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration, with 4 children, dozens of grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren in attendance. During the celebration, Isaac stood to speak, his voice still strong despite his age. 40 years ago today, I married the woman I loved. I thought I knew what love was then, but I was wrong. What I felt then was just the beginning, the seed of something that has grown over 4 decades into something far greater than I could have imagined. Victoria, you have been my partner, my lover, my best friend. You have given me 4 incredible children, a house full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a life richer than any silver mine could have provided. I am the luckiest man who ever lived, and I thank God for that day in Bonanza when you needed help, and I was there to provide it. Victoria stood beside him, her hand in his, and addressed their assembled family. 40 years, 4 children, dozens of grandchildren, and more memories than I can count. This life, this family, all started because a kind stranger bought me a stagecoach ticket when I was desperate and afraid. That stranger became my husband, my love, the father of my children. He showed me what it means to be truly valued and loved. Everything good in my life flows from that one act of kindness in a dusty Nevada mining town. I love you, Isaac Hartwell, today and always. As the celebration continued around them, Isaac and Victoria slipped away to their porch, seeking a moment of quiet together. They sat in the rocking chairs they had placed there years ago, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. 40 years, Isaac mused. It went by so fast. It did, Victoria agreed, but we filled those years well. We built something good, something lasting. We did, Isaac said. And it all started with a stagecoach ticket. Victoria laughed softly. The best investment you ever made. The very best, Isaac agreed. They sat together as the stars emerged, their hands clasped, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of shared life. Inside the house, their family continued to celebrate. Multiple generations gathered under one roof, all connected by the love story that had begun in Bonanza, Nevada in 1874. Victoria thought about that desperate young woman she had been, begging for a way out of an impossible situation. She thought about the journey west, learning to trust the quiet cowboy who had helped her. She thought about their courtship, their marriage, the births of their children and grandchildren, the challenges they had overcome, the joys they had celebrated. It had been a good life, a beautiful life, exactly the kind of life she had dreamed of but never dared hope for during those dark days in Bonanza. "Thank you," she said softly to Isaac. "For what?" "For buying that ticket. for riding beside me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. For 40 years of love and partnership. Isaac squeezed her hand. Thank you for accepting my help, for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me a family and a purpose and a reason to be the best man I could be. These 40 years have been the greatest gift of my life. As they sat together on the porch, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, Victoria felt a profound sense of peace and satisfaction. She had been saved by a stagecoach ticket purchased by a kind stranger, but she had been blessed by the love that had grown from that chance encounter. Her story could have ended in tragedy and bonanza, but instead, it had become a love story that spanned decades and generations, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the beauty of a life built together. Isaac and Victoria lived many more years on their beloved ranch, watching their family continue to grow and flourish. When Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Victoria mourned deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, and in the knowledge that they had shared a truly remarkable love. She lived another 5 years, spending her days with family, tending her garden and rereading the love letters Isaac had written her over the years. When Victoria died at 84, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last thoughts were of that day in Bonanza when a dusty cowboy had stepped up to a ticket window and changed her life forever. The story of how Isaac bought her ticket and rode beside her, of how they fell in love and built a family dynasty, was told and retold through generations of Hartwells, a reminder that kindness matters, that love endures, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of compassion. The ranch they built together remained in the family for generations, a living testament to what two people could create when they chose to face life together. And every year, on what would have been Isaac and Victoria's wedding anniversary, the Hartwell family gathered at the ranch to celebrate, to remember, and to honor the love story that had started with a desperate plea and a stagecoach ticket, and had become a legacy that would last forever.